Thank you, Liliana, for this nice introduction. Yeah, I'm happy to be here again this year. I was here last year speaking about LoRa. And now I'm actually helping Dracula Technologies on making IoT more sustainable. And starting with that, I just thought I'll show you a forecast of all these IoT research agencies. One of them that we've been using in the past was IoT Analytics. And you can see like in 2025, there will be like 40 billion IoT devices, right? If you think about these 40 billion devices, all need a battery and a battery replacement over time, you're basically looking at 100 billion batteries to be replaced by the year 2025. So this is basically not sustainable. We all agree on that, right? And I think if you look at the EU, it was mentioned before, they're not sitting still. They actually have put in place new regulations, effectively actually now, this summer. And it's going to hit the IoT industry as well in terms of the use of batteries, portable batteries, rechargeable batteries. So it's not about only sustainability, it's also about cost of ownership. The total cost of ownership for most IoT solutions is posing an issue for adoption by large enterprises. Because basically the battery replacement issue is not just a cost issue of the batteries, it's also the cost issue of the process costs, right? I have some clients or previous clients that actually had like hundreds and hundreds of offices worldwide with smart room sensors. Now replacing those room sensors, you have to schedule it, like you have to send a crew to a building to replace all the batteries just to avoid that there will be like an offline situation of a particular sensor. So to avoid that, you just create in your business case a lot of cost, manual labor to go by the offices and change batteries. It's just not sustainable. And it's also not just viable from a cost perspective because the cost of replacing these batteries in the sensors is sometimes even more or a multiple of the cost of the sensor itself, right? So these large enterprises doing their business cases, they're pretty sound in doing this and they calculate a lot of cost into this process cost. So to make an IoT business case viable, you have to slash out that piece of the equation. And then the third point here I mentioned is basically retrieving assets from mobile assets on the fly, containers, cargo trains, pallets. If you want to catch those assets and replace a battery, good luck, because you don't know where they are, right? So you have to schedule that kind of battery replacement for certain times, certain locations, a lot of cost. And the last but not least, I mean, I've seen LoRa sensors or IoT sensors in general. These are like big bricks, right? In terms of form factor, if you open them, it's all battery, right? It's not the PCB, it's batteries. So slash out that part of your design will make your sensor much more neat. And you can see from the research community, I think some of us here are from a research community, from universities and institutions. You can see the interest taking up here in, particularly here for photovoltaics, where I'm speaking for, photovoltaics to merge that into IoT. It's the number of publications has been like quadrupling over the last 3 years. So it's very promising to see that we have a lot of attention here. So you see the left side, you see basically the amount, the efficacy of the energy harvesters over time, which is increasing a lot in terms of power harvested over square centimeters. And at the same time, the economics of electronics is improving a lot, like we just heard earlier this morning from Christoph. So the wave is good, right? We have lower power used by electronics, and there's more energy harvested by the harvesters. So it makes the viability of harvesting for IoT much more evident. And you can see 3 different sources of harvesting. It was mentioned earlier today. You have basically RF and light, which is called radiant sources. You have thermal sources, and you have mechanical sources like vibration. So the light sources, we just saw a very good example with the sauna, which is the outdoor part there, the lower part. Outdoor sunlight is a real champion in generating energy, right? We all know that. The challenge is with indoor light harvesting. This is where most photovoltaic technologies are suffering. There's a lot of companies trying to make their way into indoor harvesting, but it's much more challenging because light conditions in indoor are like 100 lux, right? Whereas outdoor you have 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 lux. So that's why the harvesting technology has to be different, fundamentally different. And the company I'm speaking for is Dracula Technologies in France. They created organic photovoltaics, so OPV, that can basically yield enough energy to do wireless communications between sensors and cloud platforms, right? Whether that be LoRa, MIOT, or NB-IoT. So Dracula OPV technology called layer is basically printed electronics thin layer, right? So it's not silicon-based. And that makes the whole product much more viable for IoT because it is from a form factor, it's completely flexible. It can be 2D, 3D, and it's being produced by inkjet printing. So you can be completely, from a design perspective, free how you create the form factor. The TCO, of course, is the main driving factor for energy light harvesting because basically it drives down the TCO, as I told you before, in terms of the replacement of manual labor. And the adaptability to existing electronics, where you already have a PCB and certain placement of contacts, this is where we can easily design the Dracula foil, the foil, to adapt to it, right? So what happened to the fonts? I thought it was Chinese, it's a Chinese version here. So Dracula, I think the fun part of Dracula is just, like you see here the shape. Dracula is great in the dark, right? This is where we beat all the other energy harvesting companies. So anything below 200 lux, where nothing else goes, Dracula will still produce energy. So the foil you see here, just an example. It was nice to see earlier from Miromiko, where this foil was introduced in a room sensor. Perfectly suited, right? Room sensors have a certain shape where this foil will fit in. So the freedom of design is great. The green solution here, the sustainability part, is there's no toxic materials, right? There's no toxic waste. There's no solvents that are toxic. And the recyclability of the foil is great. So it's just from a sustainability perspective, is much, much better than a battery solution. Some examples how this is being deployed by some of our customers, like remote controls. You will see first remote controls coming to market with OPV Dracula, room sensors, and I think the middle one, I'm going to try it again. Yeah, this one here, you can see just like it's printed in a half circular form and it goes into the sensor as one piece, right? It makes the whole design and the cost of the bill of material much lower. And then you got like these temperature sensors up there that's produced by Avery Dennison. It's a large RFID company. And they were logging data for transport of pharmaceutical products like the COVID-19 vaccines. And it makes it with the Dracula OPV, makes the sensor much more powerful in terms of storing data, right? And the next step will be connecting those sensors through an LPWAN network. And why is OPV so green? There's been benchmarking studies done that I think are interesting to mention here is from an energy consumption to produce, you can see silicon is a factor 50 or 100 times larger than produce a thin film organic photovoltaic, right? So that's a huge sustainability improvement compared to the original, the typical photovoltaic technologies. We have a lot of like cheap Chinese silicon cells out there. The amount of energy to produce that could be huge, right? Also, you see that with the energy payback times, where silicon is like 2.5 years before the light produced by that particular panel will actually pay back on the time that was to produce that sensor. So you can see OPV from the energy payback times is much better. And in terms from greenhouse gas emissions, again, also silicon-based, and cadmium tellurium are much more, creating much more CO2 equivalents per kilowatt hour than OPV. So by concluding, and I don't want to keep you too long from your lunch because I think we had a short coffee break and we're happy to all start networking. So I'll keep it with saying basically that passive IoT is the way to go. Passive IoT, basically RFID, has been here for 10, 15 years and they're producing like 15 billion units a year. The next ones coming up are BLE-based. You see here a sensor of Wiliot at the right side. Wiliot is BLE-based, harvesting-based, RF harvesting, very promising. And then you have, of course, the NFC tags, which are also being adopted in the retail fashion industry a lot for just tagging a product and know what kind of article you have. What we need is for the active IoT sensors, we need to transition from batteries to energy harvested sensors. And this is, I think, the trajectory that we see ahead of us from a Dracula perspective, that our customers are basically looking for completely replacing the batteries to make the sensors green. But also some of the customers say, listen, we create hybrid sensors because basically we want to sort of have a battery solution and augment the features with energy harvesting such that you have a situation, if the battery goes dead, you still have energy harvesting to extend the lifetime so the sensor can keep communicating with the base and you can actually have an alert that you have to replace the battery. So hybrid solutions, I think, is the next step to go with full autonomous active sensors, which should be the vision, our shared vision here, I believe. And I think with that, I'd like to conclude here by saying that I think the whole IoT industry has to basically embrace energy harvesting to make our whole business more environmentally sustainable, economically viable, and compliant with the battery regulations. Thank you very much.